Hi everyone, I'm Stacy DiNardo and I'm the Communications Director here at Christ Community Chapel, and I'm sitting here today with Jimmy Kozy, our Student Ministry Pastor, for CCC's Q&A. And we all have unanswered questions about God or about the Bible, Christianity, and we like to do a weekly Q&A where we receive some of those questions from you, either by email or through text, and you can find the way to do that in the description of this video. And we like to take an opportunity to answer those questions and to take a stab at them with one of our pastors on a weekly basis. So with that being said, Jimmy, are you ready for this week's question?
Yeah.
It's a good one.
It is. It's a doozy.
It's a doozy. Okay, here we go. Why does it seem okay that men had multiple wives in the Old Testament?
Okay, well, first answer, the short answer is it's not, even though it seems like it is, but it's not.
I like that.
So we'll start there.
Okay.
It's not. So in the book of Genesis, when God creates Adam and Eve, he says, a man shall leave his father, his mother, and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh.
Yeah.
Jesus says that as well. The Apostle Paul says that as well in the book of Ephesians. Throughout Scripture, it's clear that God's design for marriage is not polygamous. It's monogamous. It's one man, one woman. So there's never a point where there's anything that's said from God that's like, hey, it's okay for men to have multiple wives. One of the prime examples that people might cite is, for example, Solomon. King Solomon was supposedly one of the wisest people ever lived. He had 700 wives and 300 concubines.
I just brought this up to you.
Yeah, I have one wife and 2 daughters, and I can't even keep them straight. And that's 1,000 people to try to figure out, right? But there's actually some clues in even Solomon's story. So the narrator in Solomon's story makes a point of pointing out how many wives he has. But the reason the narrator does that is because there is a phrase in the Old Testament law that talks about kings and how they shouldn't have multiple wives. And so what the narrator is doing is saying, hey, look, Solomon is doing this. It's a clue, because what ends up leading to Solomon's demise is as a result of his multiplicity of wives.
Right.
So he ends up with it just kind of leads to the end of Solomon.
Solomon, yep.
So just because something is depicted in a passage, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's an endorsement from God of whatever is taking place in that passage. So there's something that we use, it's called hermeneutics, which is like a theological word, a seminary word. But hermeneutics is the process of interpreting Scripture and taking meaning from Scripture and applying it to today. So hermeneutics basically works like this. So when I was a kid, when I was in 3rd grade, my brother was in 5th grade. I have an older brother. And so we went to summer camp together at a camp, and while we were there, my brother got a girlfriend, a long-distance girlfriend.
Oh, no.
And
It's trouble.
I didn't get a girlfriend on that trip, but I was in 3rd grade, so I didn't really care. He was a little bit more into girls than I was. But a few months later, we shared a room, we had bunk beds, all that. A few months later, I was rummaging around in our room, and I found this container full of letters from his long-distance girlfriend. And as any 9-year-old would do, I opened them up and I started to read them. Because I need some material. I need some dirt on my brother here. So I found his girlfriend's letters to him. And so I could read that letter. And if it says something like, you are the most handsome man in the world, and I want to be with you forever, right? If I read that and I don't think that she's talking to me, right? I'm not saying, she must think I'm the most handsome man in the world.
Right.
Right? Because there is a specific person who wrote it to another specific person, and who wrote that for a specific reason. So I couldn't just blindly pull, little sentences out of her letters and say, this is true, this is true, this is true. You have to look at the whole picture. And that's kind of what hermeneutics is like. That's what we do with the Bible. So the Bible is composed of a variety of different types of literature. There's prophecy, there's law, there is epistles, which are like teaching, and then a big chunk of it is historical narrative, which is where you'll see things like polygamy show up. But just because something shows up in a historical narrative, that doesn't make that an endorsement of that activity. It's simply being recounted. It's just a historical narrative. It's telling the story of what happened. So when it talks about David having multiple wives and Solomon having multiple wives and all these other guys having multiple wives, it's not saying this is good, this is what we want, this is how things were designed. It's just saying this is what happened. And oftentimes it also gives clues and shows how Actually, because they were acting outside of God's plan,
Right.
it ended up leading to their demise. So the one way to think about this is that there are prescriptive passages in Scripture and descriptive passages in
Okay.
Scripture. So prescriptive passages prescribe, they tell us what to do. So like the last few weeks when we've been in the Sermon on the Mount, we've
Yeah.
seen, you have heard it said, do not commit adultery, but I say to you, XYZ. That is a prescriptive passage where it's saying, this is what you should do. A descriptive passage is just where it's describing what took place. So it's
Got it.
saying, Noah built the ark and this and that happened and he had this and that wife. That's just describing events. It's in no way endorsing necessarily what took place. But if you can look and see, sometimes the narrator will leave clues
Right.
as far as, what is right and wrong and what God thinks of what's going on in that passage. So short answer, polygamy is depicted in the Old Testament. That doesn't mean that it's okay.
Okay.
It's not. But you see it because it's a historical narrative that's just recounting what took place.
Thanks, Jimmy. That was great. That really just painted a whole picture of what the Bible's saying and what is a historical narrative and what polygamy really is. If you would like to check out other Q&As from other weeks, I would encourage you to just go on over to ccchapel.com to the media page and scroll to the bottom, and you'll see a whole catalog of other questions that have been answered by other pastors on previous weeks. And hopefully this week, we would love for you to send in a question, text or email us on that. And we look forward to next week and hearing from all of you and another question. Thanks and have a great week.